Okay. Well, here we are, another Wednesday of a brown bag lunch. Thanks for everybody for stopping in on this beautiful here in Newport July afternoon. I apologize if there's a little noise out here. They're tearing up the streets. It sounds a little bit like Brooklyn here, even though I'm in Newport now. But we are so excited to have our next guest. Heather Becker is here to join us for our brown bag lunch. The Gender Equity Initiative has hosted this. Heather is the risk management and conservation, works at the risk management and conservation of rare books and works of art and paper. I'm going to talk about Heather for a second here before I introduce her. After studying painting and art history on scholarship at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and the International School of Art in Italy, Heather Becker was inspired to pursue a career in the field of art preservation. In 1989, she developed a national business plan for the Chicago Conservation Center, as the company was formerly known, and purchased the firm from its founder in August 2003. The center has since expanded to provide conservation services in painting, works of art on paper, murals, textiles, antique and fine furniture, rare books, frames and gilding, and objects and sculpture. The center is now the largest private facility of its kind in North America. Wow, Heather, that is amazing. I have so many people here in Newport that would love to talk to you. I have lots of people here who are textile conservators, and wow, so we have a lot to talk about. But first, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Lizzie, for the introduction, and welcome everybody. I have a lot of images to share with you today, so I'm going to actually be moving through the material pretty quickly, and then we're going to be doing a question and answer at the very end, which Lizzie is going to help us with. So I'm just going to jump right in, essentially. So I wanted to, you've already heard a little bit of history about the Conservation Center through Lizzie's introduction. But essentially, we've been around for 40 years now. We're the largest privately held lab in the US. And we obviously follow all of the museum standards of the American Institute of Conservation. And we have 30 experts trained from around the world covering all of these disciplines. We are honored to sort of initiate this relationship with your membership. And we look forward to a long-standing relationship that could be beneficial to all of your members as well as us. And hopefully your members can also tour the facility and be engaged in future lectures together that will hopefully be informative and helpful and giving you guidance that you're looking for, and us being a support system in any possible way that we can. The one unique thing about the center that I want to reiterate is having all of these disciplines under one roof. We are a different business model than a lot of conservation laboratories, but we have all of these experts all under this one facility. And the facility is about 30,000 square feet. And all of these experts covering all of these disciplines have each anywhere from 20 to 30 years of experience. And I'm very proud to say that many of them have worked with the Conservation Center 10, 15, and I even have 2 of the members over 20 years with me at the facility. So the level of expertise is huge, and hopefully they can all be a future great resource for each of you as members of your organization. I also wanted to mention the fact that we work nationwide, and we have a whole disaster response part of the company. So not only do we do just day-to-day advising and consulting and conserving, but we also do disaster response for fire, water, mold, hurricanes, and all different types of things. Very small accounts to very large museum level accounts all over the country. So I know that's a little bit different, and that's why I thought it would be interesting to share that part of what we do with all of you as an audience. Our facility itself, ourself is, like I mentioned, about 30,000 square feet. We have all of these wonderful things that you see on the screen that I'm not going to sit here and mention all of them. But I do have to say we have at any one time around 12,000 works of art in the facility. And many of them are either waiting to be treated or post-treatment. But we have about 300 works that are actively being treated by all of the staff at any one time. And as you know, in the field of conservation, there's lots of points for drying time and things like that. So a lot of the conservators will have anywhere from 3 to 5 different things out in their workstations that they're working on at any one time. We are centrally located in Chicago, but as I mentioned, we work with clients all over the United States. We cover all of the disciplines that Lizzie mentioned, which are all of the general areas of conservation. But I also wanted to mention, in addition to the disaster response, we do a tremendous amount of on-site collection consulting. We do all types of custom framing. We do digital work, which you're going to hear more about related to books and the archives work that we're recently doing for Hampton University. In addition to the disaster response, we also go on site and do very complex packouts and storage and collection assessments. And then lastly, we have our national transportation team with our air ride and temperature controlled trucks that go all over the country doing all of this kind of work. So we always like to emphasize at the beginning of any relationship, especially with a big group of like yours, is the level of confidentiality that we understand and respect. As conservators, all of the images that you're going to be seeing today are images that have been approved by our clients to use as educational material. But if we do receive anything that is preferred to not be shared, obviously we follow those protocols internally very, very strictly. I did want to start off by mentioning the important difference between conservation and restoration. And we do employ conservation techniques versus what is considered more historically restoration techniques. And of course, with conservation, we try to follow the tenets of non-invasive, reversible techniques. Less is more as a philosophy, and obviously related to ethics in the field of conservation, pricing based on time and materials and not on the value of an object. So we could be working on a $5 million painting, and next to it could be a painting by someone's grandmother. And those quotes are quoted similarly at an hourly rate. We range between $100 to $150 an hour. And then our on-site work is anywhere from $150 to $175 an hour. But we obviously very much want to focus on the fact that we work on collections that are purely sentimental, all the way up to major collections that are irreplaceable. And that those kind of ethical tenets within our facility are very strictly followed. So I just want to skim over some of the areas that the paper and book department do just on a daily basis. And I'm sure all of you are very aware of these overview techniques. But what I would encourage you to hopefully at some point soon be able to visit the laboratory, and we could do some demonstrations and we could have some interactive sessions with the paper and book conservators in using the different techniques. This is obviously a dry cleaning technique versus a water washing technique. And obviously the dry cleaning techniques are used when you have sensitive items that cannot be water washed. Because the pigments are not stable in water, versus things like this that have been tested in advance to make sure that water washing techniques can be used and employed. And we're very lucky to have a very state-of-the-art washing facility, and we also have a light bleaching bank that rests over the water washing facility. with all of the proper mechanics in order to do this. And our sink is very oversized. It is 12 feet by 8 feet. So we're able to get very large works within the water washing tank as well. Obviously, one of the most consistent things we do with books and paper are tear repairs using either wheat starch paste or methylcellulose and Japanese tissues and other types of tissues. Those are the most common types of tear repairs. Filling losses and using materials that are mimicking the makeup of the original materials, but also leaving evidence of the repairs themselves so that it is easily decipherable what is original versus what is part of the conservation process. And then the flattening techniques are used on a regular basis after the water washing, or maybe a Gore-Tex passive humidification package, or various other techniques. But those kind of more extensive flattening techniques are not used when you have three-dimensional elements to the books or works of art on paper, like embossing or ribbons or different types of certifications that have been glued or attached to the original surfaces. So the flattening stage of things is one of the most common elements, but also one of the most sensitive as well. Shaving things that have been attached to aggressive glues and mounts is probably one of the more challenging techniques that we use on a daily basis. It's very exacting. And of course, you could easily make a mistake. So this is something that takes years of technical acumen to do really, really well. But we have shaved things from the back that have been attached to very aggressive materials, and the outcomes have been outstanding. But this is definitely one of the trickier things to do, depending on how aggressive the adhesives are. Mold is another area that we consider ourselves to be experts in addition to fire damage and soot damage. Of course, mold is something that once it occurs, it can never be completely eradicated. We can microscopically improve it as best as possible. But if the temperature and humidity climates are returned to poor conditions, the mold spores can reactivate and redevelop and populate. So if a conservator or anyone ever says that they can completely get rid of mold, that is just not possible. So those techniques are also a bit tricky, but also very timely. So we always encourage people, whether it's fire or water or mold, acting quickly and talking to conservators and getting advice really fast can really make a huge difference with the potential recovery of works like this. And sometimes the mold has pervaded through several different layers. Here's an example of a piece that was mounted to a backing board with extensive mold, and we had to shave the back as well. So sometimes you're dealing with more than one or two problems. You can have a whole assemblage of different issues that you can be mitigating all at the same time. We also make very custom mounts. This is a Jeannie Gang journal of her architectural drawings. And in addition to restoring the spine and the pages, we made a custom display and mount. We do a lot of that, whether it's for books and paper or paintings or objects or textiles and etc. So we go beyond the conservation side of things to do these more individual long-term display options and choices so that the pieces can be protected from a risk management level. One of the first treatments I really wanted to share with you is this incredible Lilias Trotter journal. And there was over 100 pages, and there was beautiful original script. There was watercolors from her trips to Morocco and all around the world. And we obviously conserved each page, the original binding, but the person who owned this collection of Lilias Trotter also wanted to digitize the originals. So we started doing digitizing work about 10 years ago. And obviously the technology has greatly improved within the last 2 to 5 years. And now we're doing this kind of work extensively. And of course, using all archival materials to do the digitizing work on, so that here we had, in one instance, this collector could put the original Lilias Trotter journal away and protect it, and it wouldn't be handled any longer. And then the digitized versions were what they were using to share with museums and traveling exhibitions, that at very high resolution. So it mimics the journals beautifully. But at the same time, those digitized versions were able to travel and, you know, have a bit of wear and tear while the original was protected. Here's another example of the inserts of the drawings within the journal, and these were just gorgeous pages, and the digitized version is really beautiful. In fact, we did about 50 copies of this for the owner, and they gifted us one so that when you do visit the facility, we can show you an example of the high resolution digitized version of things like this, which I'm sure you've seen many times as well. But it's fascinating to see how technology has really impacted the industry of conservation and preservation. Here's just a very standard example of 2 copies of this publication from 1909. You see the before on the left and the after on the right. And you see that there's a lot of issues related to the front sections, and we had to create new fly leaves that were sewn into the body text block. And of course, there were spine issues, things that needed to be reinforced with proper hinging. And here's a close-up of the spine of the text blocks that were reinforced with hinging material. And of course, the text blocks were hung into their original cases. And here you can see the after treatment version of this up close. So then I shift to another book here that had from the 16th century, which was beautifully executed, but did have some issues related to the spine here and the text block. So, and there was also, unfortunately, some mold issues that had developed over time as well. So it was actually really good that this was caught early enough. So going back to emphasizing, as you're managing the collections that you have, and just keeping an eye on things, and sort of that whole theory of out of sight, out of mind. If you have a large part of your collection stored and you're not looking at it very often, we always encourage people that we work with to look at things on a very regular basis, just to see how things are slowly aging and potentially deteriorating over time. And one of the risk management things we really try to emphasize is protective archival materials. So this was, we created a new clamshell box with a proper external label so that it could be put away and shelved and protected. And in case there was ever any, let's say, environmental exposure like dirt and grime or soot, or God forbid, you know, water or mold or fire. So obviously the clamshell boxes act as a great risk management measure. One of the projects I really wanted to highlight today, which was recently featured in our newsletter, we send out a newsletter every month that includes 3 educational articles about recent treatments that we have done. And we've just recently published this series of letter books that we treated for Hampton University. So if any of you want to receive that newsletter, we encourage you to sign up for that. It goes out once a month. We never email more than that, and it's purely educational and never marketing. So this was a great example of several letter books. They were all in very serious condition, which you can see. There was everything that you can imagine going wrong with these, and we had an extensive conversation with the archives and special collections team at the university, and we worked with them to apply for a grant, and they got an IMLS grant for this work. And they chose to separate the bindings of the, and decide to go in the direction to where every page of the letter books could be digitally scanned, so that all of this historical context about the founder, Samuel Chapman, could be put in the cloud and be accessible to their student body, to their professors, to researchers, and everybody in the future. So it was a very large project, about 7,500 pages. And of course, sometimes this was a very untypical to debind collection like this, but because of the damage and the future need and use of the collection, it was chosen to move in this direction. So each page was cleaned, humidified, flattened, tear repairs were done, and deacidification was accomplished before we used the high resolution book eye scanner in order to do every page. And so the outcome was fantastic. We ended up putting each into the Mylar sleeves, and then created these custom boxes for them, which were also archival, and made sure that the weight wasn't too extensive. So of course it was decided upon how many pages should be within each clamshell box. And all of this was dialogue going back with the archival management team at the university in order to make all of these decisions, along with their staff and our conservators, to make the best decisions possible throughout the entire project. So we were very proud of that recently, and they also just sent us about another 45,000 pages since that project that we're currently working on digitizing from the current president of the last 30 years, who recently retired. So right now in the facility, we have underway conserving and digitizing those 45,000 pages. Another typical issue here you see our 5-volume collection that had extensive water damage. And you can see how the covers and the text blocks themselves became deformed. Of course, we had to put them into the press in order to try to get their shapes slowly and carefully over time back as closely as we possibly could. And all of the original leather covers and spines were saved. And you can see there was a considerable improvement, but of course you're never going to totally remove the age of and the character of what has transpired with these works, but it was definitely improved. And here you see them, the befores above and the afters below. I want to highlight this next treatment for you, which was a 10th century Greek codex that was shipped to us in a freezer packed case because it was still soaking wet, which is something we highly recommend doing if it is a major work such as this. If you let it dry out, it's going to be much harder to conserve, which I'm sure you're aware of. This was also a case where the damage was so extensive, and this 37 pages of vellum and then 10 pages of parchment were very extensively damaged. So we ended up separating them all, and we were able to water wash all of the pages and slowly dry them over time. And we, of course, will never get rid of all of the staining in the original patina. We never want to be aggressive about the treatments. We want to have that character sustained, and but we of course didn't want the piece to deteriorate any further. So once again, we talked with the museum in this case, making decisions with their staff about the proper approach. And you can see after the cleaning and flattening of each of the pages, and then deciding exactly on the approach of rebinding the pages back together. And you can see here was the final product, and it ended up being a really fabulous project for everybody, and because here is something that they thought was going to be a total loss, and we were able to recover it, and something that was from the 10th century. So it was a project that all of us were very honored to be involved with. And you can see here the clamshell box that was custom made to put the piece into after the final rebinding was completed. We recently did an extensive collection of the magazines, the magazine antiques. There were over 300 magazines in this collection, and the magazine is now over 100 years old. So it wasn't a complete set, but almost. It was very extensive. And so not only were all of the bindings of each of the magazines slowly degrading and deteriorating, some were obviously much worse than others, depending on how much they were used and referenced historically. So those were treated, and then the clamshell boxes were used or were created depending on the amount of volumes for each of the years in each of the collections for those years. So you can see here different stages of that project. And here's a few after treatment views of those different years of the publication. This was a really interesting project that came in recently, which was a New York Herald newspaper that announced the assassination of President Lincoln. And you can see it was in hundreds of pieces, and this was very challenging, but we cleaned all the parts, we put it back together like a puzzle, and here you can see the extensive amount of work. And you know, talk about the level of focus and concentration. This was challenging, but also extremely rewarding when you can do a treatment like this and feel like you're able to bring a piece like this back to life, and also bring the level of acidity of the paper back to neutral and make it more supple and less fragile. And of course, using the Japanese tissue and wheat starch paste as our primary campaign of treatment. So you can see here, we used the Japanese paper to infill the areas which are the edges, which were completely crumbled and lost in some instances. So here's another book. This one was a family piece, family heirloom, and had extensive damage. You can see here the original level cover, and the case was refurbished. And in this case, the conservator obviously was able to resaturate the leather, make it more supple again, and got a lot of the original tones back. This was once again a dialogue with the client, making sure that our approach and the decisions that were made were part of what the family would like us to do, and obviously retaining the historical context of the piece. So you can see here the before and after, and of course, saving the clasp and retaining that as part of the conservation as well. Here's an autograph book between 1865 and 1893. And you can see here up close the amount of degradation that has occurred and the acidity of the original materials. So what we were able to do was take all of this apart and save all of the original materials and conserve each of the pieces. And then we created new archival pages and sourced and prepared new ribbons in order to reattach everything, and also make them reversible so that nothing was highly aggressive or permanently attached to the new materials that were sourced. And you can see here, after all of those different stages, now this is going to, all of this material inside is going to be lasting a lot longer. If it had stayed within those materials which were off-gassing and disintegrating the original parts, everything would have obviously not lasted much longer. So this is a great example of something that was purely sentimental, did not have much market value at all, but was historically very important to the family and worthy of saving. And you can see here, after all of the rehinging into the new pages, it ended up being a pretty rewarding project. And here you can see the stubbing was added to the new binding so that the text block could fit and not be too tight, and so that you could leave through page after page and have easy access to all of the pages and look through everything much more appropriately without damaging any of the original materials. And then, of course, the last was the labeling and the clamshell box for long-term protection. One of the last projects I want to share with you are the ebony books. This was a collection very historic to Chicago with ebony magazines. And you can see here, this is how they came into the laboratory with extensive damage, some pages completely loose, some pages missing, a lot of tears, and a lot of issues collectively. So this was a very challenging project, but once again, we talked to the nonprofit institution that was managing this whole collection in order to decide the exact approach that they wanted to go in. And currently they are working on digitizing all of this as well, but that is a very long-term, extensive project, so that once again, these magazines can have a future reference in the cloud and be accessible, and the handling of the originals is not, as common as it used to be. And that is definitely one of the advantages of how digitization is assisting with all of this wonderful information that people historically did not really have much access to. So this was a turning point for this ebony collection. And you can see here, this is where the collection was from, and these were the boxes that were created. And now all of that material is much more accessible long term. One of the last projects I wanted to show you was very similar to what we did with the Lilius Trotter journal. This was a Holocaust journal, and the family brought this in. And once again, the original was conserved, and luckily this did not have to be unbound. We were able to use the book eye scanners and do all of this without affecting the pages or deteriorating them any further. And then we gave the family back several copies of the digital version and allowed the original to be put away safely. And here you have also another collection of magazines, the Ver, and these were water damaged. You can see the staining, the cover as well as the interior. And this was surface cleaned using conservation grade eraser crumbs, which is obviously a standard in the industry for the first stages to get the grime off of the surface. And then determining what can be done with the water staining. Because of the coating of the paper, in this instance, we were not able to treat the water damage locally, like on a section table or something else like that, because of the coating of the paper. So once again, you have sometimes less is more, and the less aggressive you are with the treatment ends up being better for the long-term decisions related to the piece. So you can see here, there was some retouching that was also done in the abraded areas, and some pencil in coloring in certain areas that were also abraded. And here we leave evidence of the water damage because of the surface coating. But of course, now this piece is definitely more stable, but it's not ever going to be back in the condition that it was in prior to this loss scenario. So I do want to hit upon a few things that I thought would be helpful to you all, and then I want to turn it into question and answers. Essentially, one of the most important things related to risk management are humidity and temperature controls. So as you're maintaining what you currently have in your collections, trying to really keep stable conditions of temperature between 65 and 72 degrees and relative humidity of 60 to 80%. Anything over 60%, you could have issues related to mold establishing. So you definitely do not want it to be higher than that. Of course, with photography and different mediums and materials, there's other types of temperature and humidity level suggestions that we can talk about in a future program. But obviously, that is one of the most important parts to maintaining a collection long term, that we see mistakes being made on a regular basis. Another is all of the housing materials. So really thinking about how is something being displayed, how is it being stored, what are the materials touching the different surfaces, whether it's a book or work of art on paper or a collection, and really thinking about all of that kind of display and storage issues, as well as lighting exposures, making sure that things are protected with UV protected glazing. And there's a lot of great technology with different types of glazing that is out there now. We can also cover that in a future program with you. And there's also an ongoing discussion related to books and paper about wearing gloves or not wearing gloves. There's a whole difference of opinions related to all of that. And everybody, you know, there's different arguments. So we say that if, you know, obviously using gloves, as long as there's absolutely no potential for residue or transfer, that is one way to mitigate, you know, any potential oils on your fingers or different things that have collected on your hands. But everybody right now is chiming in on that issue. So that continues to be an opinion going forward. And of course, just air pollution and different types of things that, you know, airborne material, whether it's just dirt and grime and air pollution or different types of air filtration systems, and thinking about that. And then also mold potentials, and which we already talked about. And lastly, infestation, making sure that your collection doesn't have any active infestation that could travel to the rest of your collection. So those are just a few of the risk management things that I can recommend. And last year, I just want to touch upon you know, what we just talked about related to archive digitization and collection preservation. And we really look forward to working with all of you and being just a sounding board, helping with any questions, problem solving going forward. I did want to end my presentation with just quickly showing you the stages of how we work. So obviously something comes into the laboratory, we examine it, we test it if necessary. We also consider any active bearer laws if the piece is made by a living artist or author, talking to them and making sure that they are aware of our approaches and approve of what we're trying to do with the piece. And sometimes we even collaborate with the artists, like we did with Carrie James Marshall in this instance. And then sometimes the testing can be very sensitive. This was an acrylic painting that was vandalized with spray paint. So of course, all of these testing phases have to be approved, and the pluses and minuses of what it could potentially do have to be weighed before we make those testing decisions. Then you would receive a proposal listing all of the condition history, the treatment recommendations, cost and time involved, and all of that is exemplified in our reports. And sometimes we even add drawings to the reports. When you have an elaborate piece like this with a lot of different condition issues, sometimes those drawings can assist to just allow people to notice all of the different issues that are within the conservation summary report itself. And one of the last things, we should be able to indicate to you whether we can return things to a pre-loss condition or whether that is not possible, or if there's a percentage level in which we can return a piece to pre-loss condition or not. And then obviously sometimes there are decisions made where something is extremely far gone like this, but because of either the cultural value, the historical value, or sentimental value, we are requested to treat things as best as possible and do what we can to salvage what is left. And sometimes those are very challenging decisions, but those are things that we would work directly with you on a regular basis. So I just want to end here. I know I covered a lot of material, and I'm sorry for talking so much, but I wanted to be able to get, sort of a head start with all of you. And we really look forward to working with all of you, and we look forward to you visiting the lab at some point in the future and meeting our team members and seeing the facility. So thank you so much for the opportunity here today. So I want to turn it back over to Lizzie related to any questions that you all might have.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was really interesting. Wow. I personally have so many questions, but I'll start it off and I'll wait for some questions. So what first came to me is do you get a lot of family Bibles?
Yeah, we get a lot of family pieces, but honestly, it's one of those things you see every year coming in on a regular basis. But I have to say, the treatments that are so interesting a lot of times are these unique journals. Those are just fascinating to work on, and some of them are from, very famous sources, and then others are just personal pieces, which you just, you
Right.
revel in the ability to be able to work on them and help save them.
Yeah, the very the individuals, the stories that come through there are just kind of incredible. James Goldwasser has a question. Any suggestions with respect to DIY repairs and protection methods, things to do or to avoid doing?
Yeah, in fact, Chin and I were talking about that, and I was wondering if in the future we could do a whole session on this with our conservators from the book and paper department, because I could talk for a long time about all of this. Obviously, the things that you don't want to do, that if you don't have experience doing, are the more aggressive things like water washing and shaving and things where you could slip up and make one little mistake and you can't go backwards. Doing more simple things like dry cleaning with erasers and things that are more of the day-to-day kind of activities to care for the collection over time. Those will be some of the things that hopefully you can build confidence with. But there's a lot of things, I hate to say it, they come to us after someone has tried to do it themselves. And, as conservators, we really try to emphasize, there's years of study and research related to becoming an official expert in the conservation industry. And that's why we want this to be an ongoing dialogue with your members, because we receive requests every day. You could send us photographs, you could send us an email. I have people texting me and our team all the time. We get those in every day, and we say, you know what, don't do anything. This is what you should do. For example, fire and water damages. There's a lot of very specific things that you shouldn't do right away. So I don't mean to be generic in my response to this, but James, I hope that we can do a program in the future with our conservators or in the facility, which would be even better. And we could talk about some of these, and we could talk through what are some of the things that you've seen before that have worked for you? What are some of the things where you felt like you were really getting into a danger zone? And those are the ones you want to avoid.
I think as book dealers and paper dealers, we've all seen tape, and tape is just the most horrifying substance having to do with paper. And it's always puzzling to look at the piece of tape and go, oh no.
Yes. Yeah. No, and there's amazing things that can be done with tape, but then again, there's so many things that we see come in with Scotch tape and all different types of really aggressive tapes with residue, and it is tricky. Those are tricky treatments, but I swear that's one of the most common things we see with book and paper. So it's very sad that people think that that Band-Aid is gonna work for them. So.
Right. How do we, how does somebody go about getting your newsletter?
So, so if it's easiest, if you all want to send me a list of who would like to, I can just do a mass drop-in, or you could also just go to our website and sign up. It's on the homepage. But if your membership is interested, or if there's certain people you want to ask them and then get back to us with a list of who would like to get it, we can easily add the whole group or part of the group, whatever's best. But it is, we've been doing the newsletters, I think, over 17 years now. And I don't think we missed a beat, even during COVID, for getting them out. Because that's one of the things we're known for. We have a readership of over 36,000 people. And a lot of it is because we don't market there. It is not a marketing platform. It is purely educational.
Is it archived? So if somebody had a particular question, they could go back and see something that had already been asked?
Yes, in fact, it's funny you asked that. We just had a meeting last week about tightening our search capabilities on our website so that, you know, you could type in an author or an artist or a period or a culture and, get a list of all of the things that we've published in the past. We're working on that right now. It's not as great as where we want it to be, but there is a search option at the bottom page of the website. But I encourage you to go to the section of news, and that's where the whole history, you could spend hours just going through article after article on the website related to previous newsletters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really fascinated with this washing of paper. It just sounds kind of against everything that you think of in terms of like paper and water, water and paper, but obviously it's something that's done. So I'd love to learn more about that. What was your personal journey from being an artist to being a conservator?
Oh, thank you for asking that. I was at the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm a painter and I do a lot of graphite drawings of very realistic faces from my imagination. I then studied at the International Art of Italy in Monte Castello di Vivio in the Umbrian countryside. I had a wonderful time, and then I came back and I've been working here at the Conservation Center for the last 34 years. I helped the founder grow it, and then I bought it with a small business loan in 2003, and helped then grow it with the staff. And I'm just thrilled that we have so many of our staff that have been with us for over a decade now. And so I feel very lucky. I continue to make my art, and it's great as an artist to be able to walk around the lab and see things being worked on and saved. So it's never boring, never boring. And I think that's why
where do you find your artists, and where do you generally find people who are interested in learning this kind of craft?
Well, conservators they're very hard to find, and we do a very challenging vetting program. And luckily we've maintained, even prior to COVID, we've maintained all of our conservation staff. We never lost a conservator during COVID, so we're thrilled. But it is a long search. The industry is getting smaller and smaller. The experts, there are fewer and fewer. And to find people that have 20, 30 plus years of experience is very difficult. A lot of conservators go into the museum sector. We are in the private sector, so it's very, very different. We get things that are in terrible shape, on horrible condition issues. And if you're not trained to deal with that kind of overwhelming situation, and you're just doing more research or condition reports or things like that, then obviously it's much harder and much more risky if you don't have that hand and eye skill of experience of working on hundreds of thousands of pieces. So we're very honored to have the team that we have, but I do have to say, to answer your question, even just when we hired our last objects conservator, it took us over 2 years to find the person that we really wanted to add to the team. Mm-hmm. So it is a very challenging part of the industry.
Right. Is there many schools that teach this? I know, as I said, my friend is a textiles curator at here at RISD, and
Okay.
teaches, but I mean, I don't, there's not too many people who are learning.
Yeah, there's only 3 degree programs in the United States. There's lots more abroad. There's are also some other smaller programs, like there was recently one at Columbia University in Chicago. So there's not a really huge broad base for people to get this kind of training. So I really support, as an employer, coming into the industry from both ways. I have certain people that have master's degrees in conservation, and I have other people that have apprenticed their entire careers under other senior conservators. And we really support the path of both,
Right.
and not place judgments against one or the other.
Right.
So
Yeah. Well, because I mean, that's probably how it used to always be, being an apprentice in any kind of
that's right.
thing. So yeah, that's great. So I love the idea of getting together with some of your maybe doing something with the book and paper people and having like a question and answer. So we'll
Yeah.
do that on for another Wednesday brown bag lunch. So yeah, thank you
Well,
so much.
oh, thank you so much. And it's great to meet all of you. And we really look forward to developing future programs with you all and helping your membership however we can.
Thanks so much. Okay.
All right. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.